The Sea Dog Tavern sits where Route 1 meets the old Duck Trap Road, the last building before 40 miles of nothing but pine and rock and the occasional moose. If you've driven north from Lincolnville toward Belfast, you've probably passed it without noticing. Just another weathered clapboard building with a Shipyard Ale sign in the window and a gravel lot that's mostly empty by 11. I took the night shift because I'm 26 years old. I dropped out of UMaine, Orono, 3 credits, shy of a useless English degree, and the Sea Dog paid $12 an hour, plus tips, to stand behind a bar and pour drinks for people who'd rather talk to their glasses than to me. Simple work for a simple failure. That's what I told myself. The tavern is exactly what you'd expect from coastal Maine. Wooden bar scarred by decades of elbows and condensation rings, a fireplace built from beach stones that's been burning since the place opened in 1952, and a collection of lobster buoys hanging from the ceiling that tourists find charming and locals stopped noticing 40 years ago. The mirror behind the bar is original, a massive thing with a gilt frame that's gone green with age, and it reflects the whole room in that slightly warped way old glass does. I started working here in October. By November, I was seeing things in that mirror that made me question everything I thought I knew about what's real. The first time it happened, a man came in around 1 in the morning. He ordered a Geary's, sat at the bar, and drank it slow the way people do when they're not really there to drink. Normal enough. I'd seen 100 guys like him, middle-aged wedding ring, the kind of exhaustion that settles into your face when life hasn't gone the way you planned. I turned to grab a rag, and when I glanced at the mirror, I saw him sitting there, in the reflection. But the reflection was wrong. Same man, same position, same half-empty glass. But his face was hollowed out, cheeks sunk into the bone, eyes like dark wells that went down forever. His mouth hung open in a silent scream, jaw distended wider than any human jaw should stretch, and I could see his hands gripping the bar so hard the knuckles had split and something dark was seeping out. I spun around so fast I knocked over a bottle of well whiskey. The actual customer smiled at me. Clumsy night? His face was perfectly normal. Ruddy cheeks, tired eyes, nothing wrong at all. I looked back at the mirror. The screaming reflection was gone. Just a tired man drinking a beer. I convinced myself I'd imagined it. Not enough sleep. Too many hours staring at wood grain and old glass. Then it happened again, the next night. And the next. And by the end of my first week, I realized I wasn't seeing things. I was seeing the truth. The owner's name is Delphine Cyr, and she's been running the Sea Dog since her mother passed in 1987. She's 73 years old, built like a woman who's spent her whole life hauling lobster traps and splitting firewood. And she has the kind of face that doesn't waste time on expressions it doesn't mean. When I finally told her what I'd been seeing, she didn't laugh or look at me like I'd lost my mind. She just nodded, poured 2 cups of coffee from the pot she keeps behind the register, and sat me down at the corner booth where the morning light comes through the salt-fogged windows. She brought a photograph with her, black and white, edges soft with age, showing a group of people standing in front of the tavern on what must have been opening day. They were all smiling, men in work clothes, women in house dresses, a few children holding bottles of Moxie. The sign above the door read, Sea Dog Tavern, Est, 1952 in hand-painted letters. "Look at the mirror," Delphine said. I looked. Behind the crowd, visible through the open door, was the gilt-framed mirror I'd been staring at for weeks, and in its reflection, I could see the same group of people, but they weren't smiling. Their reflections were pressed against the glass from the inside, palms flat, mouths stretched open, eyes wild with something between desperation and hunger. One woman's reflection had her fingers bent backward, like she'd been clawing at the surface so long the bones had given up. My grandmother built this place on a spring, Delphine said, taking the photograph back before I could look any closer. Not a water spring, something older. The Wabanaki people knew about it for thousands of years. Before any of us came here, they called it a thirst spring. My grandmother heard the stories and thought she understood what they meant. She sipped her coffee, and I noticed her hands were steady in a way that suggested she'd have this conversation before. The spring bubbles up from somewhere deep. The water looks normal, tastes normal, but it's not. It makes people need things, makes them thirsty in ways that can't ever be satisfied. You drink from it long enough, you start wanting things you can't name, and something starts wanting through you. Wanting what? I asked. Everything. Anything. It doesn't matter. The spring doesn't care what you're thirsty for, just that you stay thirsty. And the longer you drink, the more it drinks through you, until there's nothing left inside but the wanting. She pointed toward the bar, toward the regulars' stools where the same 5 or 6 people sat every night, nursing beers they never seemed to finish. Most of them have been hollow for years. They don't know it yet, but their reflections do. The mirror shows what's really happening inside a person, what the spring has done to them, what it's still doing. I thought about the man from my first week, the screaming reflection, the split knuckles, the mouth that wouldn't close. Why are you telling me this? Delphine reached into her apron and pulled out a folded piece of paper, soft and worn at the creases, like it had been handled 1,000 times. Because you work the night shift, and the night shift has rules. My mother wrote these down in 1962 after she lost 2 bartenders in the same month. One walked into the ocean at Duck Trap Beach and never came out. The other is still sitting at the end of the bar. You've served him beer every night since you started. Which one? Earl Pelletier. Graybeard, red flannel. Always orders shipyard and never tips. I knew exactly who she meant. He came in at midnight every night and left at exactly 3:14 in the morning. I'd never thought much about it. Earl died in 1978, Delphine said, drowned in his own basement when the spring flooded through the foundation. But the spring didn't let him go. None of them get to go. They just keep drinking, keep wanting, keep coming back. She pressed the paper into my hands. These rules will keep you safe. Follow them exactly. Don't try to understand them. Just do what they say. And whatever you do, don't let the spring know you can see what it's doing, because if it knows you can see, it'll start getting thirsty for you. I unfolded the paper. The handwriting was cramped and faded, but legible. 6 rules. Simple enough on the surface. But nothing about the Sea Dog Tavern was simple anymore. I read the rules 3 times before my shift that night, sitting in my car in the gravel lot while the October wind stripped the last leaves off the birches along Duck Trap Road. The paper smelled like cigarette smoke and something else. Something mineral, like well water that sat too long in copper pipes. The handwriting belonged to someone who'd written in a hurry, letters cramped together like they were trying to hide from what they were saying. Rule 1. Never look directly at a customer's reflection between midnight and 3 in the morning. If you must check the mirror, focus only on yourself. If you accidentally see a reflection that doesn't match the person, do not react. Serve them normally. Pretend you saw nothing. Rule 2. If a customer orders water, serve them bottled water only. Never use the tap behind the bar. If they insist on tap water, tell them the pipes are being cleaned. If they insist a second time, refuse service and ask them to leave. Do not argue. Do not explain. Rule 3. At exactly 2:17 in the morning, the fireplace will go out. Do not attempt to relight it. Sit behind the bar and wait. It will relight itself within 4 minutes. If it takes longer than 4 minutes, leave through the back door and do not return until sunrise. Rule 4. Some customers will try to pay with coins that feel too cold to the touch. Accept the payment, put the coins in the register, And wash your hands immediately with the soap Delphine keeps under the sink. Do not use regular soap. Do not skip this step. Rule 5. If you hear someone calling your name from the basement, do not respond. Do not open the basement door. The voice will sound like someone you know. It is not them. Rule 6. Earl Pelletier sits at the end of the bar every night. Serve him shipyard when he asks. Do not speak to him beyond taking his order. Do not ask him questions. If he speaks to you first about anything other than his drink, excuse yourself to the back room and wait 5 minutes before returning. He forgets things quickly. Use that. I folded the paper and put it in my back pocket. My hands were shaking, and I couldn't tell if it was the cold or the knowledge that I'd been serving a dead man for 3 weeks and he'd been watching me the whole time. The shift started at 10. For the first 2 hours, everything was normal, or what passed for normal now that I knew what normal was hiding. A couple from New Hampshire came in for chowder and beer, complained about the drive up from Portland, and left a decent tip. A group of fishermen from the co-op in Belfast stopped by after their boat came in, smelling like brine and diesel, and argued about the Red Sox until they got bored and went home. I served drinks. I wiped down the bar. I didn't look at the mirror. Earl came in at midnight, same as always. Gray beard, red flannel, the kind of weathered skin that comes from decades of salt air and hard work. He sat at his usual stool, the one at the far end where the bar curves toward the wall, and he looked at me with eyes that seemed perfectly ordinary. "Shipyard," he said. I poured it without meeting his gaze, set it on a coaster, and moved to the other end of the bar. My reflection watched me from the mirror. Just me. Just my face. Nothing wrong. I kept my eyes on myself and didn't let them wander. Earl drank slowly. He always drank slowly. I used to think it was because he was savoring it. But now I wondered if he even tasted anything anymore. If there was anything left inside him that could taste. At 1:40, a woman came in alone. She was maybe 50, with graying hair pulled back in a braid and the kind of tired that seeps into your bones after too many years of something hard. She sat at the bar, 3 stools down from Earl, and ordered a gin and tonic. "And a glass of water," she added. "Tap's fine." I reached for a bottle of Poland Spring from the cooler and set it in front of her with a glass of ice. "We only have bottled tonight. Pipes are being cleaned." She frowned. "I can hear the sink running." "Cleaning solution in the lines," I said, the lie coming easier than I expected. "Health code thing. Sorry about that." She shrugged and accepted the bottle. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding, then caught myself. Rule 1. Don't react. I busied myself with glasses that didn't need washing, and I kept my eyes away from the mirror, but I could feel something watching me now, a pressure at the back of my skull like someone standing too close in an empty room. The air felt thicker near the bar, and the smell of the place had changed. Less wood smoke and spilled beer, more of that mineral scent from the paper, like water that had been sitting in the dark too long. At 2:15, I checked my phone. 2 minutes until the fireplace. I moved to the far end of the bar near the back hallway and pretended to organize the bottles on the shelf. The flames in the fireplace were burning low, the way they always did late at night, casting orange light across the floorboards. 2:16. The woman at the bar was finishing her gin and tonic. Earl hadn't moved. The fire crackled and popped. 2:17. The flames went out. Not slowly, like a fire dying, all at once like someone had flipped a switch. The logs were still there, still glowing faintly, but the flames were gone. The room felt 10 degrees colder in an instant. I stayed behind the bar. I didn't move toward the fireplace. I watched the clock on my phone and counted the seconds. The woman looked up from her drink. Fire went out. "It does that sometimes," I said. "Old chimney. Drafts." She nodded, accepting it, and went back to her glass. 1 minute. 2 minutes. The log sat dark and cold. Earl was staring at the fireplace now, and I could see his hands gripping his glass tight enough that his knuckles had gone white. 3 minutes. 3.5. At 3 minutes and 47 seconds, the fire roared back to life. Not a gentle rekindling, but a sudden eruption of flame that sent sparks shooting up the chimney and threw wild shadows across every wall. Earl's grip relaxed. He went back to his beer like nothing had happened. The woman at the bar finished her drink, paid in cash that was warm and normal, and left without another word. I stood behind the bar and breathed. 4 rules down. The night was only half over. If you like the stories, please hype the videos from a button like this just above the comment section. It helps the videos to get more reach and perform well. It would take just a few seconds and cost nothing, but would help the channel grow even faster. Thank you. The next few nights followed the same pattern. I worked my shift. I followed the rules, and I tried not to think too hard about what I was actually doing. It's strange how quickly the abnormal becomes routine when your survival depends on it. By the end of my second week with Delphine's list in my pocket, I'd stopped flinching when the fireplace went dark. I'd stopped hesitating when someone asked for tap water. I just did what needed to be done and kept my eyes on my own reflection. But the sea dog had a way of testing you when you started getting comfortable. It was a Thursday night, early November, and the wind coming off Penobscot Bay had teeth in it. The kind of cold that makes the old windows rattle in their frames and sends drafts crawling across the floor like living things. We had maybe 4 customers all night. A quiet evening, the kind I usually liked. Earl was at his stool, same as always. A young couple sat in the booth by the window, splitting a basket of fried clams and not talking much. And there was a man at the bar I'd never seen before. He came in around 12:30, just after the couple left. Tall, wearing a canvas jacket that looked like it had been through a few too many winters, with a beard that might have been handsome if it wasn't so unkempt. He sat 2 stools down from Earl and ordered a whiskey, neat. I poured it and set it in front of him. He drank it in one swallow and asked for another. "Passing through?" I asked, because that's what you ask strangers in a place like this. "Something like that." His voice was rough, like he hadn't used it in a while. Been driving since Bangor. Needed to stop somewhere warm. I poured his second whiskey and let him drink in peace. The fire crackled. Earl nursed his shipyard. Everything was fine. Then the man finished his third drink and reached into his pocket. "What do I owe you?" 12 even. He pulled out a handful of change and started counting it onto the bar. Quarters, dimes, nickels, the usual mess of coins people carry when they don't use cards. I watched him stack them into piles, and that's when I noticed his fingers. They were trembling. Not from cold, not from drink. Trembling the way your hands do when you're trying very hard not to let something show. He pushed the coins toward me. That should cover it. I reached out to scoop them into my palm, and the moment my skin touched the first quarter, I understood. The cold wasn't temperature. It was something else. A cold that went deeper than nerves, deeper than bone, like touching a piece of winter that had never seen the sun. The coins felt like they'd been sitting at the bottom of a frozen well for 100 years, and the longer I held them, the more I felt something seeping through them. Into me. A thirst that wasn't mine. A wanting that had no name. I dropped the coins into the register and slammed it shut. The soap. Delphine's soap. I moved to the sink, found the unmarked bottle she kept beneath it, and scrubbed my hands until the skin went red and raw. The soap smelled like salt and something herbal. Bayberry, maybe, or juniper. And wherever it touched, the cold retreated. When I turned back to the bar, the man was gone. His glass sat empty on the wood. The coins were in my register, but the stool where he'd been sitting was vacant, and I hadn't heard the door open or close. Earl was watching me. I looked away fast, busied myself with wiping down the taps, and tried to slow my breathing. Rule 6. Don't speak to Earl beyond taking his order. Don't ask him questions. I kept my mouth shut and my hands busy. After a few minutes, Earl went back to his beer, and the pressure in my chest eased. It was almost 2 a.m. when I heard it. The basement door was behind the bar, tucked into an alcove near the stockroom. I passed it 20 times a night without thinking about it. Just a door, painted the same faded blue as the walls, with a deadbolt that Delphine kept locked. I'd never been down there. Never had a reason to. But at 1:53, I heard my mother's voice coming from behind it. "Caleb? Caleb, honey? Are you there?" I stopped moving. My mother lives in Augusta, 45 minutes south. She hasn't called me honey since I was 12 years old. And her voice had no business coming from a locked basement in a tavern on the coast road. "Caleb, I need your help. Please open the door." The voice was perfect. Every inflection, every cadence, exactly the way she sounded when I was a kid and she'd call me in from playing in the yard. It hit somewhere deep, somewhere that remembered being small and safe and loved. I took a step toward the door. Then I stopped. Rule 5. If you hear someone calling your name from the basement, do not respond. The voice will sound like someone you know. It is not them. "Caleb, please. I'm hurt. I fell down the stairs and I can't get up. Just open the door." My hand was on the deadbolt. I don't remember reaching for it. The metal was warm under my fingers, warmer than it should have been, and I could feel something on the other side of the door. Not hear it. Feel it. A presence, vast and patient, waiting with the kind of hunger that doesn't care how long it takes. I pulled my hand back like I'd touched a hot stove. "I know it's not you," I said, barely above a breath. "I know what you are." The voice changed. It didn't become monstrous or demonic. Nothing so obvious. It just shifted, subtly, the way a mask slips when the person wearing it forgets to hold it in place. My mother's voice was still there, but now I could hear something underneath it. A hollowness. An echo that went down too far. "You can see us," the voice said, still wearing my mother's tone like a borrowed coat. "That's interesting. Most of them can't see until it's too late." I backed away from the door until I hit the bar. "You've been drinking the water," the voice continued. "Not much. Not enough to matter yet. But you've been tasting it. Little sips here and there, when you thought no one was looking. The spring knows. The spring always knows." I thought about every time I'd filled a glass from the tap without thinking. Every absent sip while I was restocking or cleaning. I'd been so careful about the customers, so focused on the rules, that I'd never thought about myself. "It's not too late," the voice said, softer now, almost gentle. "Open the door. Let me show you what's waiting. You're already one of us, Caleb. You just don't know it yet." I stood there, frozen, staring at that blue door, and I felt the thirst for the first time. Really felt it. A craving in the back of my throat that had nothing to do with water or whiskey, or anything I could name. A need that went deeper than wanting. The basement went quiet. The fire crackled. Earl finished his beer and left at 3:14, same as always. And I stood behind the bar until sunrise, afraid to move, afraid to drink, afraid of what I might already be becoming. I didn't sleep that day. I drove back to my apartment in Rockland, sat on my bed, and stared at the wall until the light changed from gray to gold to gray again. Every time I swallowed, I was aware of my throat. Every time I blinked, I thought about the basement door, the warmth of the deadbolt, the thing wearing my mother's voice. I thought about the top water I'd been drinking for 3 weeks without thinking. When I showed up for my shift that evening, Delphine took one look at my face and led me to the corner booth without a word. She brought coffee and a bottle of something unlabeled that she poured into both cups. It tasted like fire and licorice and something green I couldn't identify. "You heard the basement," she said. It wasn't a question. It sounded like my mother. Delphine nodded like this was expected. It picks the voice that will hurt most. For me, it was my daughter. She died in 1994. Car accident on Route 17. Black ice near Union. The basement has been calling me with her voice for 30 years. I stopped answering a long time ago. I wrapped my hands around the cup, letting the heat seep into my palms. It told me I've been drinking the water, that the spring already knows me. Delphine was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the wind was picking up, rattling the lobster boys against each other in a discordant percussion. "How much?" she finally asked. "How often?" "I don't know. A few sips here and there. When I was cleaning or restocking, I wasn't thinking about it." She closed her eyes. When she opened them, there was something in her expression I hadn't seen before. Not fear exactly, but a kind of tired recognition. The look of someone who's watched this happen too many times. "The spring works slow," she said. "A few sips won't hollow you out overnight, but it's in you now, Caleb. A little piece of it. And it'll keep pulling at that piece, keep making you thirsty, until you either feed it or cut it out." "How do I cut it out?" "That's the part I don't know." She reached into her apron and pulled out a photograph, different from the one she'd shown me before. This one was older, sepia-toned, showing a group of people standing near a rocky outcrop in the woods. They wore a mix of traditional and colonial clothing, and their faces were solemn in the way all old photographs seem solemn. My grandmother didn't build this tavern by accident. She came to Maine from Quebec in 1948, and she heard stories about a place where the water granted wishes. She thought she'd found a gold mine. A thirst spring doesn't sound like wishes. It's not. But that's how the stories got twisted over time. The Wabanaki people who lived here, the Penobscot mostly, they knew what this place really was. They called it a place of visions. The spring didn't grant wishes. It showed you what you truly wanted. And if you weren't careful, that wanting would swallow you whole. She tapped the photograph. This was taken in 1902, near where the tavern stands now. These are Penobscot elders performing a ceremony at the spring. They weren't worshipping it. They were keeping it contained, honoring it so it would stay peaceful. When my grandmother built over the site without understanding what she was doing, she broke something. The spring was supposed to be a doorway for visions, a thin place where spirits could speak to the living. Instead, it became a trap. All that spiritual energy with nowhere to go, latching on to anyone who drinks, feeding on their wanting because no one's feeding it properly anymore. I looked at the photograph, at the serious faces of people who understood something my grandmother had blundered into blindly. Is there a way to fix it? To make it what it was supposed to be? Delphine hesitated. There might be. I've been talking to someone, a woman from the Penobscot Nation up in Indian Island. Her name is Molly Neptune, and her family has been keeping the old knowledge for generations. She says the spring can be cleansed, but it requires a ceremony. Acknowledgement of what was done wrong. Respect for what the land was meant to be. Why haven't you done it? Because it's not just about saying sorry and lighting some sage. Delphine's voice hardened. The spring has been corrupted for 70 years. It's got roots in people now, in the regulars, in Earl, in everyone who's been drinking here long enough to get hollowed out. A cleansing ceremony might set the spring right. But what happens to the people it's already inside? Molly doesn't know. Nobody knows. I thought about Earl sitting at the end of the bar every night. A dead man running on borrowed thirst. I thought about the other regulars. The ones whose reflections screamed while their faces smiled. Were they still people? Was there anything left to save? If we don't do anything, what happens? The spring keeps spreading. More people drink. More people get hollowed. Eventually, it won't just be the tavern. It'll be the whole coast road. Everyone who stops here for a beer or a cup of coffee. And somewhere down the line, someone will open that basement door. And whatever's been waiting down there will finally get out. The fire crackled in the hearth. Outside, I could hear a car passing on Route 1, tires hissing on wet asphalt. "What's in the basement?" I asked. Delphine didn't answer right away. She finished her coffee, poured another measure of the unlabeled liquor, and drank it straight. "I went down there once," she said, "in 1989. I was angry. My daughter had just died, and I'd been hearing her voice from behind that door every night for months. I thought if I could just see what was down there, I could make it stop." "What did you see?" "Water. The whole basement was flooded, but the water wasn't moving. It was perfectly still like glass, and it went down farther than any basement should go. I could see things beneath the surface, faces, bodies, people who'd been drinking from the spring for 100 years, all of them floating down there in the dark, their mouths open, still trying to drink. And at the very bottom, where the light couldn't reach, there was something else, something that looked up at me with eyes that weren't eyes. The spring itself, I think. The heart of it. Waiting." She met my gaze, and for the first time, I saw fear in Delphine Sear's weathered face. I ran. I locked the door, and I've never opened it since. Whatever's down there, it's patient. It's been patient for thousands of years. But patience runs out, Caleb. And I think it's getting tired of waiting. The front door opened, and a blast of cold air swept through the tavern. A group of locals came in, stomping mud from their boots, calling out for beers. The world kept turning, people kept drinking, and somewhere beneath my feet, something ancient and hungry was counting the days. "I want to meet her," I said. "Molly Neptune. I want to help fix this." Delphine studied me for a long moment. Then she nodded. "I'll make the call. But Caleb, if we do this, there's no guarantee you'll come out the other side. The spring's already tasted you. When we try to cleanse it, it might not let you go." "It might not let any of us go," I said. "But I'd rather fight than wait to drown." Indian Island sits in the Penobscot River, just north of Old Town, connected to the mainland by a bridge that's been rebuilt 3 times since the 1950s. I drove up on a Sunday afternoon, following Delphine's directions to a small house near the community center, where wood smoke curled from a chimney and a pickup truck with more rust than paint sat in the driveway. Molly Neptune was waiting on the porch. She was somewhere in her 70s, with silver hair braided down her back and hands that looked like they'd spent decades working, gardening, weaving, the kind of labor that leaves permanent calluses. She watched me get out of my car with eyes that seemed to see more than they should. "You're the bartender," she said. Not a question. "Caleb Theriot. Delphine told me about you. Said you've been sipping from the spring without knowing what you were drinking." She gestured to the chair beside her. "Sit. Tell me what you've seen." I sat. I told her everything. The reflections in the mirror, Earl Pelletier and his nightly visits, the cold coins, my mother's voice from the basement. I told her about the thirst I'd started feeling, the craving that woke me up at night and made me reach for glasses of water before I remembered to stop myself. By the time I finished, the sun had moved behind the trees and the air had taken on the bite of early winter. Molly listened without interrupting. When I was done, she was quiet for a long time, watching the river through the bare branches of the oaks along the shore. "My grandmother used to take me to that spring," she finally said, "before the tavern was built, when you could still walk right up to it. The water came up through granite, cold and clear, and if you sat beside it long enough, you'd start to see things. Visions, messages from people who'd passed on. It wasn't something to fear. It was a gift, a way to stay connected to those we'd lost." What happened? The French woman happened, Delphine's grandmother. She came looking for magic she could sell, and when she built her tavern over the spring, she sealed it in, trapped it. The energy that was supposed to flow through and move on got stuck, and stuck things to ensour. The spring stopped showing visions and started creating hunger instead. It couldn't give messages anymore, so it started taking pieces of the living to fill the emptiness. She turned to look at me, and there was no judgment in her expression, just a weary kind of understanding. "The people you've been serving, the ones with the screaming reflections, they're not evil. They're just stuck, same as the spring, trapped in a wanting that can't ever be satisfied because the thing they really need isn't available anymore. Connection, communication, the ability to let go. Can it be fixed? Maybe. The ceremony my grandmother taught me is meant to reopen the flow. Acknowledge the wrong that was done, honor the original purpose of the spring, and give the trapped spirits a way to move on. But it's not simple, Caleb. The spring has been feeding on loneliness for 70 years. It won't give that up without a fight. What do you need from me?" Molly reached into her coat and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside was a collection of items, dried herbs, a braid of sweet grass, a piece of granite that looked like it had been polished by running water for centuries. "The ceremony needs to happen at the source, inside the tavern, as close to the spring as possible. That means the basement. The basement door stays locked for a reason. I know, but the spring is locked down there too, and we can't heal it from above. We need to go where it lives." She pressed the bundle into my hands. "This is everything we'll need. Sweet grass for cleansing, cedar for protection, tobacco as an offering, and this stone. It was taken from the spring before the tavern was built, and it remembers what the water was supposed to be. It can help remind the spring, too." I held the bundle carefully, feeling the weight of what she was asking. "When?" "Soon. The longer you wait, the deeper the spring gets its hooks into you. I can feel it already, Caleb. You're thirstier than you were an hour ago. By next week, you might not want to fix it anymore. You might just want to drink." She was right. Even sitting there on her porch, I could feel it. A dryness at the back of my throat that had nothing to do with the cold air. A need that whispered in a voice that was almost my own. "I'll talk to Delphine," I said. "We'll set a date." Molly nodded. "Call me when you're ready. And Caleb, don't drink anything from that tavern until this is done. Not the tap, not the coffee, not even the ice. The spring can get into anything that sits too long in that building. Bring your own water from now on." I drove back to Lincolnville with the bundle on my passenger seat and a growing thirst that made me stop twice at gas stations for bottled water. Each time, I drained the bottle in seconds and still felt parched. By the time I reached the Sea Dog, my hands were shaking on the steering wheel. The tavern knew. That night was the worst shift I'd ever worked. The regulars came in same as always, but there was something different in the air. A tension that made the hairs stand up on my arms every time the door opened. The mirror behind the bar seemed darker than usual, the reflections harder to avoid, and I caught glimpses of things I couldn't unsee. A woman whose reflection had no skin, just wet muscle and exposed bone. A man whose